Hi everyone, so today we're going to tackle one of the toughest topics in all of intro psychology. We're going to talk about classical conditioning. This is most famous for the work that Pavlov did with the dogs. And if you know the basics, what happened was that Pavlov was able to get dogs to salivate to the sound of a bell ringing. Now, dogs don't normally do that. Okay? He actually trained them, conditioned them, helped them to learn to do that. I'll talk about why this is related to psychology in a little bit, but let's start by talking about what actually happened. So he was interested in the salivation process. He wanted to know about digestion and how much saliva gets produced when we are exposed to food. He decided to work with animals. He'd bring them into the lab, give them food, they would salivate. No big deal. He could record how much saliva they were producing. But after a few days, what he found was that they would start salivating as soon as they got into the room and hooked up to the equipment before he even gave them the food. And then he found that they were salivating as soon as they entered the room. And then he found that they would salivate as soon as they saw the lab assistant. This is long before they're getting the food. And so Pavlov wondered if they can salivate to something as random as getting hooked up to machinery or seeing a guy in a white lab coat or entering a room. He wondered if he could have them salivate to something else equally random, like the sound of a bell ringing. Some accounts have said it was a tuning fork, if you're familiar with that from music. So let's talk about what actually happened here during this process. So, let's go to my sheet now. So what happens in classical conditioning, we need for two things to happen before any conditioning or learning takes place. First of all, we need something that the individual doesn't normally respond to. Dogs don't normally respond to the ringing of a bell. I mean, they might turn their head in that direction or perk up their ears, but beyond that, no real response. When we have something that you don't normally respond to, it's called a neutral stimulus. It'd be like if I held up my hand, you might not normally respond to it. That would be a neutral stimulus. But the other thing we need before any classical conditioning occurs is for there to be something that the individual automatically, normally, reflexively responds to. So if we put food into your mouth, you would automatically start producing saliva. Same with the dogs. So Pavlov would give the dogs the meat, and they would automatically salivate. The meat is considered to be the unconditioned stimulus. Nothing has been learned here. That's why it's unconditioned. And it's a stimulus, something that he is giving them. And the dog's unconditioned, unlearned response, automatic response, was salivation. Again, notice nothing has been learned here. This is an automatic process. For you folks, if air went into your eyes, you would automatically close them. You would blink. The puff of air would be the unconditioned stimulus, and your blinking or closing of your eyes would be your unconditioned response. So then during the learning process, we have to do things in the exact same order each time. First, you ring the bell, no response. Then you give the food, which causes the dogs to automatically salivate. Next day, ring the bell, no response. Give the food, then they salivate. Ring the bell, give the food, then they salivate. Okay? Now, how many times it takes for the dogs to learn? It may be one time, it may be two times, maybe five. It varies from individual to individual. But eventually, by the end of this, the dog automatically salivates when they hear the ringing of the bell. The bell is no longer a neutral stimulus causing nothing to happen. Now the bell is considered to be a conditioned or learned stimulus because it causes a conditioned or learned response of salivation. Okay? At this point, something has been learned. The dogs have been conditioned. Classical conditioning has occurred. Initially, bell caused nothing to happen. Now it causes an automatic response. That's how we know classical conditioning occurs. And classical conditioning happens with a lot of other things too. Think about young kids the first time they see the golden arches, no response. But then they go to McDonald's, they get the meal, they go to the play area, they get excited. Golden arches, McDonald's, excitement. Nowadays when they see McDonald's, they automatically get excited. Or maybe there's a song. You liked it, maybe it was so-so. But it played at a certain time when an emotional event happened. Maybe it was a first kiss, or when you heard some tragic news about someone. The event caused that automatic response of happiness or sadness. The song, the event, the emotion. Nowadays, when you hear that song, you automatically feel that emotion, sadness, happiness, whatever it may be. Okay, hope that helped you to understand classical conditioning a bit better. It's a tough subject. As usual, feel free to ask if you have any questions.